Okay. So the first thing I want to do just briefly for those of you who are not familiar with the PRC, the Prevention Research Centers are a network of Center for Disease Control and Prevention funded academic research facilities in the United States that study how people and their communities avoid or counter the risks for chronic illnesses. And the PRC specifically at GSU is headquartered on the Clarkston campus, and we work with community organizations, state and local governments, residents, and other partners in Clarkston, Georgia specifically to develop, implement, and evaluate culturally and linguistically appropriate interventions to address the disparities and determinants of health for migrants and refugees, and to disseminate that work at the community, state, and national level. So today I am pleased to welcome Adam Nycamp and Amy Jaret. Adam Nycamp is a STEM teacher with Indian Creek Elementary School in Clarkston, and Amy Jaret is the former English as a Second Language Department Chair at Clarkston High School. So they both have some really interesting insights into the public school education system, and specifically that educational system and the educational processes with refugee, immigrant, and migrant youth in Clarkston. And so that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. So at that, what I'm going to do is stop sharing so that Adam, you can now share your screen. And as we wait for you to kind of get your sharing happening, Adam, maybe I'll start with Amy and just ask you to introduce yourself other than the brief introduction that I gave you. So if you could introduce yourself, and then Adam, you can go second and then lead into your brief talk today.
Sure. Thanks for having us today, Ashley. I really have that much to add. Really, I did teach at Clarkston High School for 10 years as an ESOL and English language arts teacher. I taught 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, mostly 11th grade. So that would be juniors looking towards graduation. And I developed a bit of a specialization in teaching students with interrupted formal schooling and students who have high literacy and language learning needs. And I did leave last year in May, and am now working more with families in Clarkston.
Great, thanks. And then how about you, Adam? Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, and then you can share with everyone what you'd like to talk about today.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Adam Nycamp. As Ashley said, I'm a STEM teacher at Indian Creek Elementary School. I've been at the school for 22 years and held plenty of other roles. I started, of course, as a 2nd grade teacher, 5th grade teacher, computer lab teacher, then moved into the academic coaching, instructional support positions, helping to train teachers. And that's kind of still my role. But I moved into the STEM teacher role because of what I'll be sharing during my presentation. We are trying to become a STEAM school at Indian Creek. So that's kind of what my discussion today will be centered around. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak to everybody today. So I always tell people when I do this sort of thing, the presentation is the most teacher thing that I guess I could possibly do. Everybody loves presentations when they're in education. So here we go. So you can see on this first slide that I have a little picture there that talks about impact and success. Those are two words that, resonate very much with me over my 22 years. I've tried to discover ways, of course, to come up with ways to impact our students as much as we can in order to make them successful. So that's going to kind of be the overarching theme of this presentation. So, of course, for this brown bag conversation today, we were asked to focus on the challenges faced by educators and their refugee, immigrant, migrant students in the United States education system. Of course, there are plenty. There's language, communication, cultural differences, the mental health and trauma issues that come with being refugees. Most of the challenges I would say that we face as educators, of course, there are those that I just mentioned, but most arise, of course, outside of the classroom, from educational policies to funding, staffing, instructional programs, curriculum, and even including family dynamics and cultural differences, of course. So I think one of my past school leaders, a few principals back, I would say, because, in education, principles change, but one of my leaders a few years ago said that after she asked the staff about challenges we face as a school, she said that, yes, we face these challenges, but what are the ones that we can change? And that kind of reminds me of that impact role. Like, what are the things that we can change? What are things that we can control once those kids enter our classroom? So I think that's where becoming, of course, a great teacher comes in. And also, speaking to challenges for this conversation, we also are asked to talk about promising practices and, of course, providing the highest possible quality education. I believe it is our duty as schools in DeKalb County, whether you're a private school, a public school, home school, you always want to have the highest quality education. I will spend more time in there as I go through my presentation, and it literally took me more than 20 years, of course, to form my views on these things, and I'm still adapting them as I go. So my school personally, Indian Creek Elementary School, for those who may not know, reaches one of the most diverse student populations in DeKalb County, if not the state in the country. Our students do come as refugees and immigrants from more than 40 countries, speaking more than 25 languages. 100% of our students receive free and reduced lunch, and more than 80% of our students are English learners. Still, some have tested out of the program, but with very few educational offerings outside of school. We embrace STEAM education, as I said, to provide students with more than just the traditional instructional, typically that is afforded to them just through typical school system offerings. After more than a year of discussion and consideration at our own school, we surveyed our parents, our students, the staff. We decided to take on this STEAM certification. And we have, now that we have the buy-in from stakeholders, including our school partners, it made it an easy decision, and we're just happy to be kind of moving forward with this. This was our first year in that effort. We even rewrote our school mission and vision statements to reflect what our new aim would be, and that's where I get to the next slides here. So here is our school's mission statement. It says our mission is to prepare diverse learners with knowledge and skills through problem-based learning, discovery, and creativity to become resilient risk takers and contributors in a global society. That is our ultimate hope, of course, for the students who enter our school building. And the next slide is our vision, which says our vision is to create a safe, compassionate, and innovative learning community that inspires students to succeed through a world-class STEAM education. And then lastly, we even have a motto for our school, which says to motivate, create, educate. It's what we do. It's not quite as catchy as McDonald's, but we think as a school, we developed that with our, like I said, our stakeholders, our parents and everything. And our motto basically speaks to that impact that I was talking about earlier. All right, so for those of you who don't know Indian Creek, we just moved into a brand new school this year. So year one in our new school and year one moving towards STEAM certification. There's a picture of our entire staff sitting out in our beautiful courtyard, which has an amphitheater. So, we look forward to next school year, inviting many of our school partners back into that. But I love this quote that I found having to do with buildings, because when we first got the building, everyone used to say, oh, Indian Creek deserves a new building, the kids deserve it, so on and so on. So to me, it's not the end, it's the beginning, which is why I kind of chose this quote, because this building is really kind of the beginning of what we hope to do as a school, developing our problem solvers, risk takers, innovators. So here is a Bitmoji Classroom. I'm sure most people in education, again, I'm going to do a whole lot of teacher stuff today, but the Bitmoji Classroom, it's all the craze. It's really what the pandemic brought us as educators. Everyone loves to create their little character and all that. And so first and foremost, you can see the word at the top of my Bitmoji Classroom is I'm an educator. I actually spent 3 years in high school learning Latin. So I do appreciate Latin roots of words. And of course, I don't remember Latin like that. I spent the last 27 years forgetting it. But the word in Latin, educare, means to train or mold, and educare means to lead or draw out. I hope I don't have any Latin scholars out there because I probably butchered those words. But anyways, so while the role and expectations of educators has changed over the years, we unquestionably train, mold, lead, and draw out the best of scholars on a daily basis. So as I said before, I've spent my last 22 years at Indian Creek. When I moved down here from Michigan, I was drawn to the tremendously diverse students at the school. It was unlike any other school I'd ever visited. I actually applied and interviewed coming out of college, probably at 40 different schools. So when I came here, the main populations were made up of Ethiopian students, Somalian, Bosnian, and Vietnamese. And I've enjoyed over the last 20 something years getting to see, of course, those particular student groups thrive now, because sometimes we see the new groups of refugees coming to the country and we don't see it yet. We don't get the big picture. But I'm guessing many of us have eaten at Vietnamese restaurants, at Ethiopian restaurants. You know, a lot of their cultures are ingrained in communities and things like that. So, you know, that's of course what I envision with a lot of our newer groups happening in the future. Their foods are going to be popular. Their cultural norms are going to become more ingrained in the American society and things like that. So our current student population at Indian Creek and probably Clarkston High School as a result, because we feed into them, come from Burma, also known as Myanmar, Nepal, Syria, Eritrea, Afghanistan, Burundi, Congo, and as I said before, more than 40 different countries coming from pretty much every continent across the country. We're even getting a lot more South American students than we have in the past coming to our school, which is pretty cool to watch as well. So Clarkston, of course, as we know who work here in Clarkston, is that it's considered one of the most diverse square miles in the United States. And prior to the current reduction in the number of refugees that had been taken into the United States prior to our current administration, I would regularly tell people to watch the news for world conflicts, and that my school would have those students arrive within the next few years. That's kind of, you know, the thing we could tell people is, like, if you see war happening around the world, you can rest assured that some of those students will probably end up at Indian Creek eventually. All right. So I truly believe that education, of course, is a great equalizer in our world, making anything possible for anyone. So that's kind of written in our mission statement and vision statement at the school as well. So the next slide. I clicked the link, I'm sorry. Let me do it again. Oops, I'm just clicking links. There we go. All right, so in their shoes, we've all heard walk a mile in our shoes. And, you know, as a teacher, you see kids come to school with lots of different shoes, from flip-flops to mom and dad shoes to soccer cleats. That's my favorite because I'm a former soccer player at my high school level. I did that. So, you know, these kids come to school with soccer cleats, and, you know, so we know that, you know, of course, our students come with different stories. I've included wooden clogs up there. I haven't seen those at my school, but that kind of speaks to my own Dutch background, because my family, which I'll share in just a moment, comes from the Netherlands, and I know plenty about that. So thinking about being in their shoes, well, I can't personally relate to the refugee experience. My family did go through the immigrant experience many generations ago, and I've, you know, made an effort to talk to my parents and my grandparents prior to that, and, you know, learned that they came to America and started the early Dutch settlement here. They're now in Holland, Michigan. That's where the majority of my family comes from and lives. My name Nycamp, of course, is Dutch. My mom's side is Clarkston. And I noticed when I moved down to Atlanta, there's not many Nycamps down here. Just a thing. I've met a few Dutch people in and around Atlanta, but not many like that, not as many as Michigan. So my great-great-grandparents on my dad's sides arrived in the early 1800s. So on my dad's side, I'm in the 5th generation. Some of my relatives even fought in the Civil War. My grandparents on my mom's side came in the late 1800s. And so on her side, we're in the 4th generation. So, you know, my family, the great-great-grandparents, of course, spoke only Dutch, but then as their kids started to go to school, they encouraged them to speak other languages. So I can somewhat relate to students, you know, when they arrive, you know, sometimes parents, you know, encourage them to speak English only. In fact, the story with my great-great-grandparents is that they told their kids that they had to speak only English. Of course, we don't necessarily encourage that, and all families are different in how they encourage their kids. But so my family actually got to have that opportunity to come from another country to the United States. So I like to be able to speak to kids about that, and talk a little bit about my heritage and experience of my family with them as well. So the ways that I experienced culture, of course, growing up, you see the wooden shoes there again. I got to wear those when I was a kid. I don't do so much anymore, but so we always had those kinds of events to learn about that thing. So the next couple slides I'm actually going to share with you real quick. Because when I speak to maybe people who don't necessarily understand the experience of the students that come to our school, if they're just asking about something or whatever, I kind of like to do a little lesson in Dutch. So I'll probably be butchering the words, so hopefully I don't have any Dutch scholars out there. But so this says, de boom groeit met zonlicht en water. All right, that's what it kind of says in Dutch to an extent. And so if you look at this sentence, and you have to consider that kids, when they come to our classrooms at elementary school, we're talking to them in a totally foreign language. They don't know what we're saying. Even if we write it on the board, even if we say it slow, even if we say it 20 times, the only thing you probably recognize in this whole sentence is maybe the word at the end there, water. I mean, that's spelled just the same as ours is. So if I start to teach somebody about this sentence and I say de boom, and I show them a picture as we would, with our students, they'd say, oh, okay, I know what that is. They'd know it in their language or whatever. So of course we can recognize that's a tree. The word grow it, or hruit, is how it should have been pronounced. So I did butcher that word. That you can look at these pictures and you can see that, oh, that means grow. Okay, I know what grow is. So as a student, they're probably starting to get a picture. I always tell people, it's not that the kids don't necessarily know anything. It's just that the translation part isn't there. They need those reality and those hands-on experiences, was where, of course, STEAM education would come in to really get them, actively engaged in what they're learning. So met zonlicht, these words, of course, mean the sun. So, students would know what the sun is, of course, and water, and there's that, of course, water that I talked about. So basically the sentence is saying, of course, trees need water, sunlight to grow. That's essentially what it means. So, eventually the language part will come along, and, that's how students learn in elementary education. All right. So just to kind of quickly go through the two words that I said were kind of the underlying theme of this presentation. So impact, the definition is to have a strong effect on someone or something. And I like the image of the Newton's cradle. That's the thing with the balls that go back and forth, because if you drop one ball, it bounces one off the other side. If you drop two, it hits two off the other side. So basically, the more we put into our students and the more efforts we put into it, the more we're basically going to get out. So I actually have a Newton cradle in my classroom, and the kids love it. They love to see how it works and everything. We get to talk about that sort of thing. Also on this slide, I have a quote that is by an educator named John Hattie, and he has a quote that says, "Know thy impact." And he's done educational series on this kind of phrase, where sometimes teachers don't consider what their actual impact is with students. So at Indian Creek, even during COVID and coming out of it, we tried to do as much as we could to impact our students. We had partnerships to get students, when they're out of school, STEM kits. Some students had hands-on STEM kits. I would do Teams meetings with them. They do some coding stuff and circuitry and stuff like that. So that was pretty cool. Of course, we have our robotics team. We have a partnership with a program that does after-school coding, the hands-on learning that comes with STEAM. And next year, we're starting a program with the global goals, also called the sustainable goals, through the United Nations. And, that's going to be a great way to kind of make impact in our world and community. So it's more than, of course, just reading and math. We have to consider the students' multiple intelligences and how they best learn and things of that nature, as well as their social emotional learning. So another way that we had impact is the community events that we've done. We've been having more and more. Of course, I know our GSU family over here, you guys know about the vaccine events we've held at the school. We're actually going to have one again Saturday this week. And then we've also added another event to that this weekend, which Amy knows about. It's early learning informational fair, because one thing we've talked about over several years now, we've never been able to make this happen, is to inform our parents of early learning opportunities for their kids, especially with the learning loss that happened. Sometimes parents will just keep their kids at home until first grade, and then they'll come to our school for the first time, having never spoken English. And, there's always those challenges. And sometimes parents just don't know. They get information from the school to apply for our pre-K program, but we really only can serve up to 48 kids, 2 classes of 24. So that's just a very small drop in the bucket compared to the impact that we want to have. So this event coming up is on Saturday going to be a great way to have impact for our families. So we're looking forward to that for sure. And the next slide, of course, is for success. So the definition of success is the accomplishment of an aim or purpose. I researched some things to what people would say a successful school has or is. And basically it says that a school that has a clear and shared focus, high standards and expectations for all students, opportunity and time to learn, effective leadership, high levels of collaboration and communication between students and staff, frequent monitoring of learning and teaching, a safe and supportive learning environment, and high levels of family and community involvement. Those are kind of the top 8 things that repeatedly come up in the research in terms of what makes a successful school. So hopefully at Indian Creek, of course, and hopefully other schools as well that serve refugee, immigrant, and migrant populations would, hopefully aim for those things. And I did get a chance to hear the previous 2 brown bags and saw the things that they were speaking to at their respective schools. And it sounds like, that they do a lot of the very similar things. In fact, when I heard the International Community School, they talked about doing a winter holiday store where they sold cheap items to their families for $1 to $5. And we have been doing something similar to that for years in a partnership with Friends of Refugees. And that's just a way to empower, of course, our families and whatnot. So with the word success, I actually, for the last couple of weeks, have been speaking to staff and students. I actually did a short little survey with the students and staff. And these are basically what I asked them to do is to look at this list of choices and choose the top 5 things that would make a successful school. Because I was just curious, what would students and teachers say? There's another educator moment for me, doing some data collection. And then the question at the bottom says, what is your definition of student success? So basically, to share some of the results, the students, and it's interesting how the responses were different. The students said that a fun, supportive learning environment was number 1. So that makes sense. Whereas the teachers said collaboration among teachers and leaders was number 1. The students said a clean school. The teachers said effective teachers. The teachers said effective school leaders, high expectations, and differentiated learning activities. That's kind of what ended up being the top 5 for our teachers who took the survey. For the students, they said, along with clean school and fun, supportive environment, is lunch variety. That was their number 3. So, all right, you got to talk to the cafeteria staff there. Teachers and students working together. And then there was a tie for the last one that said having friendly adults in the building, fair school rules, and effective teachers. So it was very cool to kind of see what do the students think about a successful school versus what do the teachers think about it. And then, of course, they had a chance to kind of say what is their definition of student success. So it was interesting seeing, again, the student replies. Of course, they spoke to grades, to high test scores, working hard, that's the kind of thing that they said. But when I got to the teachers' responses, and there were a few good student ones beyond that, like I said, one said, teachers put less pressure on them. That was what one student said, so that was kind of interesting, just to quote that. And what did another one say? A student follows all the rules, makes the right choices. So there's some different variations there. But then when it came to the teacher responses, they said students are successful when they're engaged, excited about learning, when their teachers have high expectations, and when they feel loved and supported. Students are successful when they have a sense of purpose and become independent learners and problem solvers. One teacher said students master at least 75% of the content standards. That was a very teacher-like answer. So yeah, it was a great opportunity, of course, to do that survey there. And then the last slide I'm going to share. there's my responses. I forgot I had slides for those guys. That's okay. That's basically what I was reading from. So my last slide today is kind of something I've developed over the years, and I'd like to use the shun part of education. So education comes through with our students when we have connection, when we have innovation, when we have creation, motivation, collaboration, dedication, and finally competition. And I always put competition last because some people, there's a great debate over competition. But just to kind of speak to that, I found one good quote about it. And that's okay that I skipped past it. But it says that healthy competition inspires kids to do their best, not just good enough. When students compete, they will become more inquisitive, research independently, and learn to work with others. They will strive to do more than is required. These abilities prepare children for the future situations of all kinds, whether it's applying to college, seeking a promotion, or finding a cure for cancer. The ability to be competitive will give them an important edge. All right. So I know there's another side of the debate with competition, but anyways, I'll leave it at that. That was given by the founder and executive director of truecompetition.org, which is an interesting website, and it's Jennifer Beal. So I'll attribute that to her. So here's kind of my information here. I have a few websites here. I have our school website at the top. Our school, my personal website is in the middle, and at the bottom is our kind of STEM school website where we kind of list things that we've done for STEM so far and all that stuff. So you feel free to look at any of those websites. I can probably copy and paste them in the chat for you all to have. And then my email is there at the bottom. I put my personal email. I can share my professional email as well, but I'll put those in the chat as well. So thank you for your time, and I will turn it back over.
Thanks, Adam. That was really interesting and nice kind of introduction to Indian Creek Elementary and also to kind of your teaching philosophy. So thanks. I wonder if maybe what we could do now is maybe I'll start with you, Amy, and then Adam jump in. And actually, Adam, you alluded to this a little bit in your overview, and I'm just wondering if we could hear from both of you regarding your perspective on the kind of both challenges and successes that you've encountered or experienced specifically in teaching the refugee, immigrant, and migrant community. So maybe Amy, I'll start with you.
Man, I wish I had brought a pencil and notepad with me. Can I repeat your question back just so that I make sure? So you asked if we could speak to the challenges and successes of working specifically with refugee, immigrant, and migrant children.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
I do want to begin my answer a little bit by just saying that at Clarkston High School, the refugee, immigrant, migrant population is about 2/3 of the school population. It is not 100%. As an ESOL and English language teacher, I did teach exclusively refugee and immigrant students, but I just want to honor and acknowledge that a large percentage of the student body at Clarkston High School is American born and is living in the same conditions in Clarkston that our refugee and immigrant newly arrived students are living in. And so I think often in the academic and social spheres of folks in Clarkston who work for nonprofits, that gets forgotten or left unsaid. And so I want to just take a minute to say that. That being said, to speak from my experience with challenges of working with this particular population from my vantage point as an ESOL teacher at the high school has been more of the challenges of working within a very, very large public school system. The students and their needs do not pose challenges to talented teachers. The difficulty and the challenges really come with wanting to innovate. Then Adam's presentation illustrated so many ways that Indian Creek has been innovative over the last 20 years. And I commend Dr. Nycamp for putting in so much hard work in that effort. large systems like DeKalb County schools are subject to sometimes political whims, and you may have administrative staff for many years who are very supportive of innovation that specifically meets the needs of these learners who the system was not designed for. The curriculum was not written for them. The school day was not designed for them. The very fact that they can't go home for lunch and come back is foreign to many of our students, especially the teens, who feel very capable and have a lot of responsibility within their home and have always lived in many of them have lived a more adult life than the typical high school is built for. And so, to have an administration that's supportive of innovation of any type that will meet the students where they are and adapt to fill in gaps and find creative ways to solve problems is a gift. And it's not something that in a large public school, anyone can count on having forever. You may arrive to work one day and have major changes in your building level leadership that can really impact innovative programming and structural things that departments or teachers or grade level clusters have been doing. And successes, Clarkston High School's graduation is in 2 weeks. Graduation is always a phenomenal moment to celebrate successes. But successes also can be very small and happen on a day-to-day basis. Success to a high school teacher, probably an elementary teacher as well, is when a student who's been struggling finally has a moment of like, oh, I get it now. Success is having a favorite teacher. Sometimes when life is fast paced and you have a lot going on at home or after school or in your personal life, success is just knowing that I have a place to go to eat lunch in an environment that's less hectic than the cafeteria, or knowing that you have a team that you're playing on. Like a lot of the extracurriculars provide a lot of those moments of success for our high school students.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I like that that idea of success looking like those, like being grounded in relationships, and can certainly understand the challenges you shared around kind of the school system as like a really big kind of boat to try to, it doesn't turn quickly, right? And it probably isn't very adaptable to changing circumstances. So I can see how that would very much be a challenge. Adam, did you have anything you'd like to add to kind of challenges that you've experienced as an educator in the school system and working with the population kind of specific in Clarkston?
Yeah, I definitely
think
want to read.
You dropped out for me for a minute, Adam.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, so yeah, I do want to reiterate what Amy said about the working within the large school system. It has always been a challenge, and what you mentioned about the changes in leadership. I'd say at this point, we're benefiting from the fact that both of our former principals, well, one was the regional superintendent for a period, and then she moved into another position, and then my former principal moved into her position. She's currently there. So they definitely understood the dynamic of the refugee population. So, we do have that support. I know in other regions, just they put whoever is kind of next up for that leadership role into those positions. So if we ever had that situation arise where we just had a new leader come into our main cluster area and kind of were asking us to do certain things, they may not fully understand the population. So that's definitely a benefit at this point where we are. Yeah, but definitely, I know Amy mentioned that we try to innovate as much as we can at Indian Creek. It took many, many years. We weren't always there. We had students who were in an intensive English program outside of the school before, and we kind of decided over the years that wasn't where we needed them to be, because basically they teach them how to use the restroom. They spend a year doing that, and by the time they came to us, they weren't coming with the content skills and things that we would take higher precedence in making sure that they knew. So it was almost like a lost year or lost 2 years before they finally were able to come to us. So, we worked hard, and as a school, and the leaders and the teachers said we didn't want that necessarily for them anymore. So that was one thing that we've done to kind of get around those challenges. It took years for the district itself to develop an intensive language program that would be at the schools. They had the International Community Center, or the center where the students would go. But once some schools decided to keep the students at the school, they wanted to develop the program to have there. So that's kind of a somewhat recent development over the last few years, I would say. I don't know how many years ago they started doing that, but so yeah, just I kind of mentioned how when I arrived, there were different people groups, the Ethiopian, the Somalian, the Vietnamese, and they were very well established. One of the greatest challenges I think our school faced was when the Myanmar Burmese population came in, and basically our school went from 700 kids to 1,200 kids in 2 years. So huge gain. And the first couple of years, we didn't even have interpreters because they were such a new people group to the country. We didn't have the supports. And so that really kind of forced us to truly learn how to serve ESOL students, because even with the Ethiopian and Vietnamese, they had community centers, they had community leaders and things that would support them when the kids came to school. They had their backpacks because, the Somalis who came before them wouldn't let them go to school without backpacks. So, they had those supports in place. But yeah, when a new people population comes to Clarkston, for sure, that's always a challenge as well. But yeah, I think I spoke plenty about the successes. I mean, our biggest successes are oftentimes the way we engage the families. I understand for high school, even with American-born students, high schools, the communication with families go down compared to elementary schools, but we love our coffee and conversations we had prior to COVID, and we even do them virtually now still, but the parents say they miss the coffees and the food that came along with it. So hopefully next year we'll be bringing them back into the buildings for those every month. Just a place to talk to parents with interpreters there, and they can ask questions. And the more years we had those coffees and conversations, our parents, they're vocal. They say they ask questions, more so than when we first started that. They have suggestions, so that's a big part of it as well. Our next goal, of course, is to have our PTA fully run by parents again. We do have some teachers who are kind of supporting PTA and things like that, but we want the parents to have kind of full reign of that. And another part with our STEAM is we want to start a school foundation that's dedicated strictly to, funding STEAM activities and educational things that we want to do. So that would take us outside of the kind of hopping through the loops to get money from the district and using Title I funds. Amy, I'm sure, knows about, you want to get money for anything, you have to go through all these things. But we know if we develop a foundation, and get the parents involved, and we know they're there, and we're going to continue to work to develop those areas. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, for those additional comments, Adam. Question that kind of follow-up question to both of your comments that I have, and I encourage any others on the call to put chat questions in the chat if you have any. But like Amy, you were talking a little bit about, the challenges of being in a large school district where you can't innovate perhaps, quickly or effectively. And maybe it's harder to find creative ways to solve problems. And kind of also, you mentioned kind of politics, and Adam, you followed up with this, comment about not having people in leadership positions that really understand working with the refugee, immigrant, migrant populations, plural. And so, aside from what you mentioned, Amy, about maybe needing to have the school day look differently for maybe kids that want to go home for lunch, for example, and Adam, the example you gave about needing interpreters, those were kind of two things that stood out for me. But I'm wondering if, in addition to those two things, if either of you could comment more on kind of how the challenges of innovating, the challenges of having people in leadership positions that kind of don't get the RAM populations, what what does that mean for refugee, immigrant, migrant kids in schools? What does that mean for you all as teachers who are trying to teach them in terms of these challenges? Like, how does that show up for, or what does that look like with teaching RAM kids in particular?
Sure. If you don't mind, Adam, I have an example that comes to mind that you know about, so you can fill in too. Just jump in. So at the high school level, one major challenge that youth face when they first arrive is that no matter how old they are or how much schooling they have done in the outside of the United States, if they don't bring a school transcript, they start in 9th grade. And so what ends up happening often is that we have students who are 17 or 18 and maybe were close-ish to graduating from high school in a school that was maybe an informal program, or maybe it was a not formally accredited program, or maybe it was very formal, but their family had to leave in such haste that they were not able to bring their documents. And so what ends up happening is there's a steep, that really impacts our students. That really impacts a 16 or 17-year-old who is arrived like with all the other emotional, just like, I'm in a new country, I'm in a new place, I'm starting over. Wait, you're telling me I have to go back to 9th grade? What? And so that's one. There are also other kids who would be impacted by this kind of example too, but especially for those kids, DeKalb County Schools does have a program that's existed for many years. That's an alternative high school program. It's designed to get kids through high school a little faster. It's a shortened school day. It's basically like a no frills kind of high school program, and it's existed for a really long time. It was not, they do have an ESOL program there to serve those students who need language support, but it wasn't designed with this particular group of people in mind necessarily. So one of the major issues that we've encountered over the years is that school has a very strict policy that you must have, and someone can correct me in the chat if I get the details wrong here, but you must have, I believe it's 6 credits. And that means that essentially a student has to do all of 9th grade before they're allowed to go into this accelerated program that's designed to help kids catch up. And they have their reasons for it. Again, it's not designed for the refugee immigrant child in mind. Their reasons have more to do with it's designed to be a program for people who need to catch up. And so over the years, we have worked very hard pursuing different avenues to either get that 6 credits waived for students in particular situations, or to get it waived entirely for everyone, or to come up with a different program that is very similar to that, where students who are older, students who might even reach high school, like there's a 21 age limit on being in high school. And so what do we do for these students? How do we get them access to the program that would allow them to catch up and graduate in a way that would give them the dignity of graduating on time? And also, how do we work within the system to even make that available? So over the years, there have been a number of projects. There's one project that always circles back around to establish a program with a what do you call it, a jobs-based program, like a career and technical option that would also provide a lot of language and culturally specific support for some of our older students who are 17, 18 in the 9th grade, because they don't have that transcript and just they are itching to take care of their families. These young people are, it's not a matter for them of dropping out seeming like failure. For them, it's like, if I drop out, if I don't come here anymore, I can get a job, and that's success in their eyes. And so there've been a number of projects to try to work with a school. What would a school look like for those students? How could they continue to grow academically and work towards that career that they know their family needs them to have?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Adam, did you want to add to that? And then I have a question, a couple of questions in the chat to pose to you guys.
Yeah, I know you mentioned interpreters. I think we do pretty well with that at the school. Like I mentioned before, we have them available for our coffee conversation. Of course, the only issue that arises, like I said, is that we have more than 25 different languages, and typically we, impact the top 5, top 6 or 7, maybe. If it's a big event, we might have additional interpreters or whatever, but there are always going to be some parents who don't have that. But we do also have access to, of course, the language line and ELSA and everything. Yeah, I like how Amy was speaking to the high school experience. It always interests me because I always wonder where the kids go, beyond and, how they experience it there. I know one of the things I asked Amy for not too long ago was, I wanted a list of the former salutatorians and valedictorians, because I know I kind of watch year after year, and typically, one of our students is the salutatorian and valedictorian. I love to see that. We have a former student who plays for Atlanta United now. We have former students who are authors. I bought their books. So, we know their success, and the challenge is, of course, that many of our students, of course, don't finish the whole education journey in Clarkston. They move on to other communities and everything. So kind of what we do is just such a small part of their life, which is why, to me, it's so important to have that impact to lead to future success. One of the greatest worries for me, trying to become such a STEAM school and providing these kinds of opportunities for schools, is that when they go to middle school, and we find that too, a lot of the families, for one reason or another, don't want the students to go to our feeding middle school. They try to move them in ahead of that, or they try to get them in a different middle school, whether it be Fuji's or, just different kinds of programs in and around Clarkston, or even outside, they might move to a different county or whatever. So there's always that challenge where, you always wish the best for the students, and you put a lot of energy into it and you want to see them successful. But then when you look at the graduating class of Clarkston High School 7 years down the line, it's like, a handful of the students who are still around and everything. So, yeah, we've had a student move, and he was like a state wrestling champ and everything. So yeah, sometimes we can follow some students, but a lot of the times we don't. So I think one of the questions I saw, and I did make a note of that, talking about the constant arrivals that we're starting to get, of course, again, under the Biden administration. We had years where, very slow students coming in, but we used to have, really, especially the Burmese situation I talked about, where we grew from 700 to 1,200 kids every week. We had 10, 15 new students every week coming in and registering and getting through the process to get into classrooms and everything. We're starting to edge up towards that again. And I know that Afghani was one example of that. And, of course, the Syrian, I said, watch the news. We're going to get them here in Clarkston eventually, probably. So when it comes to that, yeah, we really rely on, and with the Afghani population specifically, it was great because we had a professor who came to the school, and he had lots of resources already, and he had interpreters who could help with the language and everything. We don't always get that, of course, but with that particular population, I believe, like, he talked to the principal and, administration, and he said, what are the needs or whatever. And at the time we were coming more face to face at school, and kids were coming there, but basically everything we said that the students might need, he worked with his group to do that. So that would be, of course, fantastic if every time a new people group came, we had those kinds of supports. But if we don't, then similar to what I said with the Burmese population, we have to have a good toolbox of our own kind of to rely on until, we find the relationships that we need and supports that we need, like to help them culturally and all that to be successful. So,
yeah, that's helpful, Adam. Amy, did you have anything to add to that specific question about, how difficult or easy, what is it like for schools and for teachers to try to accommodate, varying influxes of incoming populations from other countries that maybe weren't, that are new to the system, that weren't planned for, where there's not some existing resources like translators and trainings related to kind of cultural awareness and responsiveness. I imagine, as you mentioned before, it's kind of, the system is not designed to be highly adaptable, right? So I just wonder if you have anything to add, particularly about that issue, especially since I think, as Adam mentioned, we might see, we're already seeing influx of people from Afghanistan and then maybe from Ukraine. So I just wonder if you have any comments to add.
Sure. On a school level, I think there are always new fun programs that teachers and support staff are coming up with. At the high school level, there's always opportunities for mentorship between older students, younger students, students who've been in the country longer, students who haven't. And among the students, remembering the experience of being the only one and being the new kid transcends language and culture. And so that kind of sharing and mentorship within the building is valuable in those moments. To speak more broadly to this group about kind of county-wide how things work related to this question of how the school can handle influxes, I really would encourage everybody who's here and who cares about these issues to really get involved with opportunities in the county, such as the facilities studies. They just finished one, so pay attention. In 4 to 5 years, they'll start talking again about a facilities master plan and a study. And about 4 or 5, at the previous one, 4 or 5 years ago, I was tagged by my school to be one of our representatives and attend every meeting. And we specifically brought up this issue at every meeting, because what they do is they bring in people who work on understand neighborhood planning. And what they did was they show charts, and they'd show every bus stop, and they'd show every number of children who get on a bus at every bus stop for elementary, middle, and high school. And they make these 10-year projections. And we sat in these meetings and we said over and over again, you cannot make a 10-year projection in Clarkston. You cannot make a 5-year projection in Clarkston. Follow, like exactly what Adam has been saying, follow the news. Whoever is having a conflict right now, 3 to 5 years from now, they will be filling those apartments, and you don't know how many children they have, because you can't just do the math of these kids are going to grow up and go away and whatever. And we were the only voices in those meetings saying that. So if you understand how the population growth goes in Clarkston, they need your voice. And it will happen again. And part of the reason why Clarkston High School is actually not given a new building or even an expansion, and during the last round of facilities master plans, when we were very, very overcrowded, was because those voices were not heard.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Amy, and an important message. I just, in our last couple minutes, I have one more question to ask you, and it dovetails, I think, nicely from the point that you were making, Amy, which is, what are the things that you think need to change in the classroom, in the school, at the city, county, state, and even national level to increase quality education and education-related outcomes for refugee, immigrant, migrant youth specifically? Maybe Adam, I'll start with you.
Yeah, there's actually plenty. And, speaking to the leadership turnover, especially at the county level, every time there's a new superintendent, not speaking necessarily to the region, because like I said, I think our regional leaders are pretty familiar with what is happening in Clarkston at this point. And I think there's, great value in the DeKalb has a parent family engagement department who's been very present in Clarkston as well, which has been great. But every now and then, even like at our ribbon cutting, I think our principal had mentioned to me in passing that someone came in and said, oh, you guys are high ESOL population. What's it like to teach, all the Spanish speaking students and everything? It's like, this is Clarkston. It's more than 40 languages and all that stuff. So, to an extent, recognizing that ESOL, of course, ESOL strategies for teachers, ESOL strategies across the district, they're very useful, but there's so much difference between, being able to teach at a school where if you have several teachers who speak a language, you can do pretty well, with having the common language, whereas at a school where none of the teachers, which is basically our school, speak the languages of the students, with the exception of a few, we have staff members and everything who do, and of course the interpreters, but they're not in the classrooms every day. And just understanding that the instructional practices, of course, that we put in place, having to meet the needs of those students and, engaging them and going back to that impact and success and making them, excited about their future. I like how Amy spoke to, students coming to high school and they start again in the 9th grade. Parents experience that with their careers, where they had a nice career before and they come here and, and we know that many of our parents work at chicken factories and things like that. So that's kind of, I imagine that's pretty confusing to the students. And, my dad was a doctor, my dad was a lawyer, and, but I think just policies, we need a lot more people speaking to the policies that are made at the district level. I think it is getting better, just the more that they recognize, and as a country, of course, that they almost are forced to adjust to an extent just because of how many ESOL kids, especially in DeKalb County, are in the classrooms and in Atlanta overall. But like nationwide, I'd still think I'm not gonna say they're clueless. They have departments and everything, but they don't understand like the variety of services that are needed to serve the students, that to serve the parents and things like that. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, Amy, anything to add in terms of things that need to change? I'm sure you could both write multiple books on the subject matter.
I mean, that's a really hard question. I think one of the efforts that was well underway before the pandemic was to improve our training related to childhood trauma and to offer teachers and administrators and everyone in the building more training in terms of responding with respect, and responding and adding trauma-informed practices into your classrooms is one thing. Adding trauma-informed practices into the school as a whole is a completely different and much larger challenge. So I think that the pandemic did disrupt some of those initiatives, even though to a certain degree the pandemic opened everyone's eyes to even more ways that our families are impacted consistently. I do think because there are more limitations on who's allowed in the building and what extracurriculars people can stay for, and more meetings being moved to Zoom and things like that, I think, and I don't have my finger on the pulse of it because, like I said, I did leave the district in May of this past year, but I do see that as something that kind of was moving in a really positive direction that now may have gotten backburnered. And I really hope to see more of it.
Yeah, that's an important point. Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Adam. I know we're at time, and I know we could have many more hours of conversation about this, and appreciate both of your insights so much today, and look forward to additional conversations at some point. And just want to briefly remind everyone that We have our next brown bag is with one of our community-based COVID ambassadors, Caden Toon, and he's going to talk about Burmese culture and to foster a greater understanding of Burmese culture in our communities. So please join us for that. Be on the lookout for information about that. And of course, visit our website for more information, for recording from today. Reach out to me if you have any additional questions or want to connect with Adam or Amy offline. And just again, want to thank both Adam and Amy for joining us today. We really appreciate having you. So thank you.
Thank you for having
Thanks
us. It was great. Have a good day.